She stepped off the train, and the entire town of Millhaven went quiet. Not the polite quiet of people being respectful. The specific quiet of people watching something they were certain was going to fail. Her coat was wrong. Her hands were wrong. Everything about her was wrong for a mountain ranch in Montana Territory in October. Caleb Stone looked at her for exactly 3 seconds. Then he said, "You are not the woman I asked for." She looked back at him, not with apology, not with fear, not with the desperate need to be accepted that he had been bracing for. She said, "I know, but I'm the only one who came." The town heard it, and started counting the days until she left. If that just stopped, you subscribe right now, hit the bell, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to Montana Territory 1886 and find out what happens when a woman everyone expects to fail decides she has something to prove. The town of Millhaven had opinions about most things. It was that kind of town, small enough that everyone's business was everyone's business, close enough to the wilderness that people had developed strong views about what survived and what didn't, and old enough in its particular way of thinking that those views had calcified into certainties. The people of Millhaven knew what belonged in the Bitterroot Mountains and what didn't, and they had been knowing this for long enough that they had stopped questioning whether they were right. When word got out that Caleb Stone had sent to a marriage agency, the knowing hardened into something close to prophecy. He'll end up with some city woman who can't cook. She'll be gone before the first snow. This is going to destroy him. They were not entirely wrong to be skeptical. Caleb Stone was not a man who made accommodations for anything he couldn't control. He had built his ranch in the upper valley of the Bitterroots over 8 years of work that most people would have found impossible, and that Caleb had found simply necessary. The land was brutal in the specific way of mountain land. It asked everything, and returned exactly as much as you put in, no more. And it had no patience for weakness or sentiment or any quality that was not directly useful. Caleb had the same quality. This was not cruelty. The people who knew him, and they were not many because he did not cultivate knowing people, understood that Caleb Stone's coldness was not about disliking others. It was about having learned at a cost he did not discuss that everything you loved could be taken, and that the most reliable protection against losing things was not having them. He had had a family. He did not have them anymore. He had loved his land with the specific, clear love of a man who understood what he had made. The land remained. The land would keep remaining as long as he kept working it. He had sent the letter to the agency in January, which was practical rather than romantic. His land claim on the upper valley required, per the terms of the territorial agreement, that the land be actively maintained as a family operation. Single men could hold temporary claims. Permanent title required a household. Caleb had been aware of this provision for 2 years and had been managing around it, but the timeline had become pressing, and managing around it was no longer viable. He had written the letter carefully and without emotion. He needed a woman who could work, who understood livestock, who had experience with frontier conditions, who would not require more from him than the arrangement provided. He had been specific. He had been clear. He had been, as he was, with everything efficient. The woman who stepped off the train on an October Tuesday was the specific opposite of everything he had specified. He saw her from the platform before she saw him. The traveling coat was the first thing, the quality of it, the fit, the fact that it was clean in a way that suggested it had not been worn for more than the journey. Her hands, when she adjusted the small leather case she was carrying, were the hands of someone who had not worked physically in any meaningful sense. Her hair was arranged with attention in the way of someone for whom appearance was a consideration rather than an afterthought. Everything about her said St. Louis, or Boston, or somewhere that was not here. He had the letter from the agency in his coat pocket. He had brought it because he had not been certain the woman he was expecting would be there. These arrangements sometimes fell through, and he had wanted the documentation to hand. He looked at the letter. He looked at the woman. "You are not the woman I asked for," he said. She looked at him, not with the anxiety he expected. not with the apologetic quality of someone who had arrived as the wrong person and knew it and was hoping he would be gracious about it. She looked at him the way he looked at problems directly without performance assessing. "I know," she said. He held the letter. "The agency made a mistake." "No," she said. He held the letter. "The woman you wanted changed her mind," she said, "before the train left St. Louis. The agency offered the ticket to several others. I was the one who took it." He held the letter. "Why?" he said. She looked at the train which was pulling away from the platform with the complete indifference of machinery that had no stake in the situation it was leaving behind. "Because I had nowhere else to go," she said. He studied her. The coat, the leather case, the hands. "You're from St. Louis," he said. "Yes," she said. "You've never worked a ranch," he said. "No," she said. "You don't know livestock," he said. "Not yet," she said. He held the letter. "Not yet," he repeated. "I learn things," she said, "when I need to." He held the letter. He thought about the land claim and the timeline and the agency and the fact that the next arrangement through proper channels would take months he did not have. He thought about the woman standing in front of him. "You won't survive my ranch," he said. She tightened her grip on the leather case, just slightly. He saw it. "Maybe I won't," she said. "But I survived everything before I came here, and I didn't come here expecting it to be easy." She held his gaze. "They told you I would destroy your ranch." He held the letter. "They were wrong," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. He had spent 37 years developing an accurate assessment of what people were capable of and what they weren't. He had been right more often than he had been wrong. He was looking at a woman who appeared completely unsuited to what she was proposing to do, and his assessment said she would not make it through the first month. He was also looking at a woman who had taken a ticket to the mountains because she had nowhere else to go, and who had not apologized for it, and who had told him she was going to prove the whole town wrong. He put the letter in his pocket. "My wagon's at the end of the road," he said. "The drive to the ranch is 4 hours." She looked at the wagon. She looked at the road. She picked up her case. She walked toward the wagon. He watched her walk. She did not look back to see if he was following. He followed. The drive was 4 hours. He had made it 200 times, and it was always the same. The road narrowed, the trees closed in. The mountain worked on you in the specific way mountains worked on people who were not used to them. Something about the scale of it. Something about the way it reduced you without trying to not, because it was hostile, but because it was simply larger than you in every way that mattered. Most people became quiet in that drive. Clara Whitmore became something else. She asked questions. Not the questions he expected, not the anxious questions of someone trying to demonstrate interest, or the social questions of someone making conversation. She asked specific questions about the ranch. The acreage, the cattle count, the water situation, the supply arrangements, the seasonal work cycle. What had been the primary challenge of the past 2 years? He answered each one. He answered them because they were the right questions, and because answering them efficiently was preferable to not answering them. After the 5th question, he said, "Why do you want to know all of this?" She held her hands in her lap. "Because if I'm going to manage a household effectively, I need to understand what the household is managing around," she said. He held the reins. "You know household management," he said. "Yes," she said. "In St. Louis," he said. "In St. Louis," she agreed. "But the principle is the same. A household is a system. A ranch is a larger system the household exists inside. If I understand the larger system, I can manage the smaller one in a way that actually helps it." He held the reins. He thought about that. He thought about it because it was a sound way of thinking, and not what he had expected from the coat and the hands and the leather case. "The biggest challenge of the past 2 years," he said, "has been the water rights dispute with Victor Harrington." She turned to look at him. "Tell me about Victor Harrington," she said. He told her. Victor Harrington was the largest landowner in the valley below Caleb's mountain property. He had been acquiring land for 4 years, with the specific patience of a man who understood that enough small acquisitions added up to control of a region. What he wanted was the water rights to the Upper Valley Creek rights that were attached to Caleb's land claim, and that would, if transferred, give Harrington the ability to manage water distribution for the entire valley below. He had offered to buy. Caleb had declined. He had offered again. Caleb had declined again. He had then begun working through other channels, talking to the Territorial Land Office about technical failures in Caleb's claim, maintenance, suggesting that a single man operating a mountain ranch was not meeting the family operation requirement, generating the kind of administrative pressure that was not a direct attack, but that accumulated into one. The marriage arrangement Caleb had decided would resolve the administrative pressure. A household meant the claim was solid. A solid claim meant Harrington had no technical avenue. "He's been waiting for you to fail a technical requirement," Clara said. "Yes," Caleb said. "And now his strategy is to wait for me to leave," she said. "Which restores the single-man problem." He held the reins. "Yes," he said. "He told the town I would destroy the ranch," she said. "He started that rumor," Caleb said. "The town believed it because it fit what they already thought." She held her hands in her lap. "He wanted them to believe it," she said. "Because if they believe it and repeat it, and if I hear it enough times, I'm more likely to become it." He held the reins. He looked at her. She was looking at the road ahead. "That's a specific way of thinking about it," he said. "I have dealt with people who operate that way before," she said. He held the reins. He thought about the relatives, whoever they were, who had put a woman in a position where she had nowhere else to go. He thought about the specific quality of someone who had navigated that situation and come out of it with this particular way of thinking about manipulation. "Tell me about St. Louis," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "After," she said. "When we get to the ranch." "Why after?" he said. "Because I want you to see what I'm capable of before you know what I came from," she said. "Most people decide what you're capable of based on where you came from. I'd rather have you decide based on what you actually see." He held the reins. He was quiet. Then, "That's reasonable," he said. She said nothing. He drove. The town of Millhaven had gone to some trouble to make sure the new bride understood their view of her prospects. He had not been there for most of it, but Walt Greer, who ran the feed store, and who was the most reliable source of information about what the town was saying, had told him on the way to the station. "People are saying she'll be gone by December," Walt had said. "People were saying that before they saw her," Caleb had said. "People are usually right about that kind of thing," Walt had said. Caleb had said nothing. He was thinking about that conversation now, watching the mountain road from the wagon seat with Clara Whitmore beside him, who had asked 5 specific and intelligent questions about ranch operations and had told him she'd deal with the where she came from conversation after. He thought people are usually right about that kind of thing. He thought, and they are sometimes wrong. He thought about how to tell which. The answer, in his experience, was to watch what people did when the situation was hard, rather than when it was manageable. The situation was not currently hard. The ranch was the hard situation. He would see then. They arrived at the ranch as the light was going, the specific late afternoon mountain light that made everything look both harsher and more beautiful than it was. The main cabin was solid and functional. The barn was in good repair. The fence lines were his best work, and he knew it. He stopped the wagon. She looked at the ranch. He watched her look at it. Not with the anxiety he had expected. Not with the performance of enthusiasm he had also expected. She looked at it the way she had looked at him at the station, directly assessing, taking inventory. "The barn needs a new hinge on the east door," she said. He looked at the barn. He had been meaning to address that hinge for 3 weeks. "Yes?" he said. "The woodpile is positioned wrong," she said. "If the wind comes down from the north slope, you'll lose 1/3 of it. It needs to be moved against the south wall." He held the reins. He had organized the woodpile 2 months ago. He had organized it before the summer that had been drier than usual, and before he had fully understood which direction the pre-winter winds ran on this particular exposed side of the slope. She was correct. "I'll move it tomorrow," he said. She looked at him. She did not make anything of the fact that she had been correct. She climbed down from the wagon. She picked up her case. She walked toward the cabin. He sat on the wagon seat for a moment. He thought she looked at the ranch for 30 seconds and found 2 things I hadn't fixed. He thought she did not make me feel bad about it. He thought that is an efficient quality. He went to take care of the horses. Inside, she found the kitchen. He could hear her from the barn, the specific sounds of a person doing an inventory. Opening things, moving things, understanding the space. He had set the kitchen up in the way of a man who had been cooking for himself and prioritizing efficiency over everything else. The result was functional and ugly in the way of functional things that had not had attention paid to them beyond their function. He finished with the horses. He went inside. She was at the stove. She had found things he had not specifically told her about, and she was making something from them. He stood in the kitchen doorway. "What are you making?" he said. "Supper," she said. "From what?" he said. "From what's here," she said. "Which is sufficient. The organization could be improved." He held the doorframe. "The organization was sufficient for 1 person," he said. "Yes," she said. "Now there are 2." He held the doorframe. "You don't have to make supper tonight," he said. She looked at him briefly from the stove. "Why not?" she said. "Because you've been on a train since this morning," he said. She turned back to the stove. "Caleb," she said. "Yes," he said. "I came here to be useful," she said. "Making supper on the first evening is useful. Letting me do it is useful." She held the spoon she was working with. "If you want to be thoughtful about it, find me a second pot. The one I have is too small." He found a second pot. He put it beside the stove. He sat at the table. He watched her cook with the same specific, efficient attention he brought to the things he did well. She was good in the kitchen. Not experienced with frontier cooking specifically, he could see that in the ways she navigated unfamiliar equipment, but competent in the underlying understanding of what cooking required. She made decisions quickly. She did not fuss or second-guess or ask permission for each choice. She made supper. She put it on the table. She sat across from him. He ate. She ate. The kitchen was quiet. After a while, he said, "St. Louis." She held her fork. She had said after. He was asking after. She said, "My father ran a trading company. Wholesale dry goods primarily. After he died, my uncle took over the management of the estate. He told me there was nothing left after the debts." She held her fork. There was something left. But he managed the something left into his own accounts and told the family there was nothing. He held his fork. "How long ago?" he said. 6 years, she said. "What did you do in 6 years?" he said. "I worked for other people's households," she said. "I was good at it. I am good at managing systems, and I am good with accounts, and I am good with the administrative side of running a large operation." She held her fork. "But you are always the help in someone else's house. You are always the competent person who makes other people's lives function, and who is thanked when it is convenient and told you're no longer needed when it isn't." He held his fork. "And then the ticket," he said. "And then the ticket," she said. The woman who was supposed to come had a father who had tried to arrange the match 2 years ago and had recently died. She felt free to back out of the commitment. She held her fork. "I was in the agency office because I had been attempting to arrange a different placement. They offered me the ticket. I took it." He held his fork. "Why this one specifically?" he said. She held her fork. She thought about it honestly. "Because the man who wrote the letter sounded like someone who needed a partner," she said. "Not a servant, not a decorative addition." She held his gaze. The letter was practical and unsentimental, and it asked for someone capable rather than someone pleasant. "That's what I can offer." He held his fork. "You read that in my letter," he said. "Yes," she said. "And you thought you were the capable person it was describing," he said. "I thought I could become that person," she said. "There is a difference." She held his gaze. "I told you I learn things when I need to. This is a thing I need to learn." He held his fork. He ate the rest of his supper. The food was better than he made for himself. Significantly better from the same supplies. He noted this. He noted it the way he noted the barn hinge and the wood pile as information. After supper, he said the rules. She held her cup. "Tell me," she said. "I start before sunrise," he said. "I expect whoever is managing the household to be functioning before I leave for the day. Supplies are ordered monthly, and I keep the accounts." He held the table. "The cattle are my responsibility. The horses are mine. The upper ridge fencing is mine. Everything inside this property line is yours to manage however you see fit as long as it functions." She held her cup. "The accounts," she said. "You keep them?" "Yes," he said. "I'd like to review them," she said. He held the table. "Why?" he said. "Because I'm good at accounts," she said. "And I told you I understand the household better if I understand the operation it sits inside." She held his gaze. "I'm not asking to take over the accounts. I'm asking to look at them." He held the table. "You'll have access to them," he said, "when I've had time to assess whether that's appropriate." She held her cup. "That's reasonable," she said. He held the table. He had expected her to push. She had agreed. "The bedroom is at the end of the hall," he said. "There's a second room I use for storage. I can clear it." "Don't clear it yet," she said. "I'll manage with what's there." He held the table. "All right," he said. She stood up. She began clearing the supper things. He held the table. He thought about the barn hinge and the wood pile and the supper that was better than his from the same supplies and the 5 intelligent questions on the wagon road and the way she had said, "Don't clear it yet," with the same tone she used for everything direct, not demanding, not apologetic. He thought about the town of Millhaven and Victor Harrington and the prophecy that had been circulating about the city woman who was going to destroy him. He thought about a woman who had said they were wrong before she had even seen the ranch. He had spent 37 years developing an accurate assessment of what people were capable of. He was revising his assessment. He did not revise assessments often. He went to bed. In the morning, he was up before 4. He came out of his room, and she was already in the kitchen. He stopped. "How long have you been up?" he said. "Since 3:30, she said. "Coffee is ready." "I told you I start before sunrise," he said. "You did," she said. "I don't work for you while you're asleep." She handed him coffee. "I work when there's work." He held the coffee. "There isn't work at 3:30 in the morning," he said. "There is if you're learning the kitchen," she said. "I spent an hour going through the pantry properly. I have a list of what needs to be ordered." He held the coffee. He looked at her. She was wearing practical clothes. She had changed from the traveling coat into something that was not ranch clothing, but was not St. Louis clothing either. She had organized her own appearance with the same efficiency she appeared to apply to everything else. "Show me the list," he said. She showed him the list. It was comprehensive and organized by category and included 3 things he had not thought of but was immediately aware he needed. "The salt block situation has been affecting the cattle behavior," she said, pointing to item 7. He looked at item 7. He held the coffee. He had attributed the recent restlessness in the north pasture to the early cold. She was looking at the same information from a different angle. She was not wrong. "I'll add it to the supply order," he said. She went back to the stove. He held the coffee. He stood in the kitchen and thought she has been here 14 hours, and she has already made 3 useful observations. He thought the town of Millhaven is watching and waiting for her to fail. He thought they may be in for a longer wait than they expect. He drank his coffee. He went to work. The next 2 weeks were the most interesting 2 weeks Caleb Stone had spent on his ranch since he built it. Not because they were easy. They were not easy. She struggled with the horses. Genuinely, physically struggled, and there were 2 days where she came in from the paddock with the specific expression of someone who had been tested beyond what they were prepared for and had not quit, but had come close. She struggled with the physical labor, the carrying, the chopping, the lifting, the constant cold weather work that the ranch required and that her body was not yet conditioned for. He saw her hands at the end of the first week, and the blisters were real. She did not complain, not once. He had waited for it not maliciously, but because in his experience people complained when things were hard. It was not a moral failure. It was what people did. She did not do it. What she did instead was study. She watched everything he did with the animals and asked one specific question each time. Not many questions, one precise one. By the end of the second week, she had 12 answers and 12 corresponding actions, and the animals had begun responding to her with the specific relaxation of animals who have decided a person is not a threat. She managed the accounts. He had given her access at the end of the first week. She had gone through 3 months of records in an evening, and had not changed anything, but had left a single note in the margin of the September entry feed, cost July-August inconsistency, worth examining with supplier. He looked at the note. He went back through July and August. She was right. He said nothing about it for 2 days. Then at supper he said, "The feed inconsistency." She held her fork. The July supplier charged for a full delivery that the August records suggest was short by about 12%, she said. Over a season, that's significant. "I'll address it with the supplier," he said. She held her fork. She did not say "I told you so." She said "good," and went back to eating. He ate his supper. He thought she fixed the July-August problem without announcing she'd found it. He thought she found it, noted it in the margin, and waited for me to look. He thought that is an efficient quality. He thought about Victor Harrington, who had told the town that the city woman was going to destroy Caleb Stone's ranch. He thought about what destroy meant, and what it meant that 2 weeks in the ranch was running better than it had run in 2 years. He thought Victor Harrington is going to have to find a different approach. He was right about that. But he did not know yet what the different approach was going to look like. He would find out. For now, he ate his supper. And across the table from him, Clara Whitmore, who had arrived with a leather case and a city coat, and hands that had never done this work, ate her supper too, and did not look like a woman who was going to quit. She looked like a woman who was just getting started, and Caleb Stone, sitting across the supper table from her at the end of the second week, was beginning to understand that the distinction between starting and already being started was one of the most significant distinctions available to a person. Clara had not started when she arrived. She had been operating from the moment she stepped off the train. He was only now recognizing the difference. The third week brought the first real test, not a test he had designed. Caleb was not a man who tested people deliberately. He simply ran his operation and observed what people did inside it. The test arrived as most real tests did, because the mountain did not care whether you were ready for it. The horse. The horse's name was Duke, which was a name Caleb had given him ironically because Duke was the least dignified animal on the property. He was a working horse, 11 years old, with the temperament of something that had been pushed too hard for too long, and had developed specific opinions about what it was willing to do and for whom. He was useful because he knew the mountain trails better than any of the others. He was difficult because he had decided at some point in his life that people needed to earn his cooperation every single time. He had thrown 2 hands in the past 3 years. Clara had been working with the easier horses for 2 weeks, which was what Caleb had arranged without saying he'd arranged it. On a Wednesday morning, the easier horses were all needed for a fence work task that required Caleb and the 2 seasonal hands he'd brought in for October, which left Clara with Duke. She didn't know about Duke's history. He had not told her. He had told himself it was because she needed to learn on her own terms. He acknowledged later that he had wanted to see what she would do. He was in the upper pasture when he heard it. Not a crash, a sharp sound, the kind that meant a horse had decided to make a point. He looked down toward the paddock. Duke was in the far corner, with his ears flat. Clara was between him and the fence. She was not in the position of someone who had just been thrown. She was in the position of someone who had assessed that she was not going to win this particular exchange on the terms she had started it, and was recalibrating. Caleb watched. She stood still. She stopped trying to approach Duke directly. She turned her back on him. This was not what people did with Duke. People tried to establish authority. They moved toward him or they walked away completely. She did neither. She turned her back and stood still in the middle of the paddock. Duke's ears came up. She remained still. After about 2 minutes, Duke took a step toward her. She did not move. He took another step. She turned around slowly. She held the halter at her side where he could see it. She waited. Duke walked to her. She put the halter on him without rushing. She led him out of the paddock. Caleb held his fence post and watched her lead the horse through the lower gate with the specific steady quality of someone who had figured out what the situation required and done it. He went back to the fence work. At supper he said, "Duke." She held her fork. "Difficult horse," she said. "Yes," he said. "He had a bad experience with someone who pushed too hard," she said. "You can see it in how he responds to direct pressure. He needs to think he's made the choice." She held her fork. "Once he thinks he's made the choice, he cooperates." He held his fork. "Where did you learn that?" he said. "I didn't learn it," she said. "I figured it out in the paddock." He held his fork. "In 30 seconds, he said. "Closer to a minute," she said. He held his fork. "You turned your back on an 11-year-old horse with a history of throwing people," he said. "I didn't know about the history," she said. Then she held his gaze. "You knew, though." He held his fork. "Yes," he said. She held his gaze. "Why didn't you tell me?" she said, not with anger, with the direct curiosity she brought to things that didn't make sense to her. He held his fork. He thought about how to answer that. "I wanted to see what you would do," he said. She held his gaze. "That's honest," she said. "Yes," he said. She went back to eating. He went back to eating. After a moment she said, "What did you see?" "Someone who figured out the problem," he said. She held her fork. "And?" she said. He held his fork. "And solved it without asking for help," he said. She held her fork. "I would have asked for help if I hadn't figured it out," she said. "Asking for help when you need it and not asking when you don't are both efficient choices." He held his fork. "Yes," he said. She went back to eating. He went back to eating. He thought I put her in a situation I hadn't told her about to see what she would do. He thought she figured it out and then called me directly on what I had done. He thought without anger. He thought that is also an efficient quality. The visitor from town came on a Thursday. Clara was in the kitchen going through the winter supply projections she had started building. She had decided on her own that the current supply ordering system was reactive rather than anticipatory, and had begun constructing a forward-looking approach based on seasonal patterns she had extracted from 3 years of records when she heard the horse in the yard. She looked out the window. The man dismounting was well-dressed in the way of money rather than fashion, well-made coat, good horse. The specific presentation of someone who understood that the frontier required a different kind of wealth performance than a city did, but still required performance. She had not met Victor Harrington. She knew immediately that this was Victor Harrington. She went to the door. He stopped when he saw her. He looked at her with the expression of someone who had formed a picture of something and was encountering the actual thing for the first time. "Mrs. Stone," he said. Smooth, warm, the voice of a man who understood that warmth was a tool. "Mr. Harrington," she said. He blinked. "You know who I am," he said. "Caleb described you," she said. "Can I help you with something?" He held his hat. "I came to call on Caleb," he said. "Is he here?" "He's in the upper pasture," she said. "I can send word if you'd like to wait, or I can give him a message." He held his hat. He looked at her with the assessing quality of someone deciding how much of an obstacle she was going to be. I can wait, he said. Come in, she said. She made coffee. He sat at the kitchen table. He looked at the kitchen, the organized shelves, the supply projections. She had been working on the account books, open on the side table. You're settling in, he said. Yes, she said. Montana is different from St. Louis, he said. She held his gaze. In some ways, she said. Many ways, he said with the specific warmth of someone being helpful. In the ways that matter for ranching, yes, she said. I'm learning. He held his coffee. He looked at the account books. Caleb has you working on the accounts, he said. I work on the accounts, she said. She did not say whether this was at Caleb's direction or her own initiative. He held his coffee. That's ambitious, he said. For someone new to ranch work. She held his gaze. Household management includes accounts, she said. I've kept accounts for most of my adult life. He held his coffee. He looked at her with the expression of someone recalibrating. He had come expecting to find something useful. A woman who was struggling. A woman who was uncertain. A woman who was close enough to leaving that a strategically placed conversation might help her along. He was finding something else. You're from St. Louis, he said. Yes, she said. Family business, he said. The specific casual question of someone fishing. My father's business, she said. He passed 6 years ago. I'm sorry, he said. The warmth again. Thank you, she said. She held her coffee. She looked at him. She said, Mr. Harrington, I should tell you something directly. He held his coffee. He waited. Caleb has explained the water rights situation to me, she said, and his history with you regarding the Upper Valley claim. She held his gaze. I want you to understand that I am aware of the context of your visit. He held his coffee. His expression adjusted slightly. I came to call on my neighbor, he said. You came to assess whether I'm going to last, she said, which is relevant to your plans for the water rights. He held his coffee. He held her gaze. He made a decision. She could see the decision being made, the specific moment of someone choosing between the smooth approach and the direct one. You're perceptive, he said. I've dealt with people who operate the way you operate before, she said. He held his coffee. And how do I operate? He said. You identify structural weaknesses in situations, and you apply indirect pressure to those weaknesses rather than direct confrontation, she said. Because indirect pressure is deniable. Direct confrontation creates witnesses. She held his gaze. The structural weakness you identified in Caleb's situation was the single-man problem with the land claim. Your indirect pressure was the narrative about the city woman who would destroy the ranch. If I fail, the claim weakens. If I fail loudly enough, you have grounds to petition the land office. She held his gaze. I understand the logic of that. He held his coffee. He looked at her for a long time. He said, You figured all of that out. Caleb told me the facts, she said. I arranged them into their logical structure. It wasn't difficult. He held his coffee. Mrs. Stone, he said. Yes, she said. You are considerably more than I expected, he said. I know, she said. He held his coffee. He looked at the account books. He looked at the supply projections. He looked at her. I hope the ranch continues to do well, he said. It will, she said. He left his coffee mostly undrunk. He left. She stood at the kitchen window and watched him ride down the road. She thought he came to see if I was the weak point. She thought he knows now that I'm not. She thought he's going to find another approach. Caleb came in from the upper pasture 2 hours later. She told him about the visit. He held his coat. He said, You told him you knew his strategy. Yes, she said. He held his coat. Why, he said. Because now he knows that approach won't work, she said. He'll have to find a different one, and the different one will take time to develop and deploy. She held his gaze. We have the inspection in 6 months. Every week he spends developing a new approach is a week we have to consolidate the operation. He held his coat. He said, That's a specific way of thinking about it. Yes, she said. He hung his coat. He sat at the table. What do you think his next approach will be? He said. She held her coffee. I don't know yet, she said. But I think it will be through the supply chain rather than the land office. His leverage through the land office is weakened now that the household is established. His leverage through suppliers and neighboring ranchers is different. He can affect costs and relationships in ways that are harder to see coming. She held his gaze. I've been looking at who you buy from and what the relationships look like. He held the table. For how long? He said. Since the second week, she said, after I understood the Harrington situation clearly. He held the table. He said, You've been investigating my supply chain for 3 weeks without telling me. She held his gaze. I've been building a picture, she said. I didn't want to mention it until the picture was complete enough to be useful. He held the table. He thought about the July-August feed inconsistency. He thought about the supply projections on the side table. He thought about a woman who had been on his ranch for 3 weeks and had been doing systematic work he hadn't asked her to do and hadn't announced. Show me what you found, he said. She showed him. It took an hour. What she had found was not dramatic individually. No single thing was obviously corrupt or obviously wrong. What she had found was a pattern. 3 of his 4 primary suppliers had business relationships with Victor Harrington. Not publicly, not officially, but through the specific connected ownership structures that you could trace if you knew what to look for in account records and public filings. She had found it by comparing his supplier names against the territorial business registration records she had requested by mail 3 weeks earlier. You requested business records from the territory, he said. By mail, she said. They arrived last week. He held the table. You did this on your own, he said. It needed doing, she said. He held the table. He held everything she had shown him. He thought about Victor Harrington at the kitchen table this afternoon, looking at those account books with the specific expression of someone seeing the weapon he had expected to find had already been found. He thought Harrington came to see if she was the weak point. He thought she had already closed the weak point before he arrived. He said, Clara. She held his gaze. This is excellent work, he said. She held his gaze. She did not make anything of it. What do we do with it? She said. He held the table. We diversify the supply chain, he said, before the winter order, so that Harrington's leverage through suppliers is reduced before he knows we've identified it. She held her coffee. I have 3 alternative suppliers already identified, she said, with pricing comparisons. She went to the side table and produced a document. She put it in front of him. He held the document. You have 3 alternative suppliers identified, he said. I requested pricing from them at the same time I requested the business records, she said. It seemed efficient. He held the document. He held it for a long time. He thought about a woman who had arrived 3 weeks ago with a leather case and soft hands and had been diagnosed by the entire town of Millhaven as the thing that was going to destroy him. He thought about what destroy meant. He thought about what the 3 weeks had actually looked like. He thought about Duke and the paddock. He thought about the July-August inconsistency. He thought about Victor Harrington's face when she had told him she understood his strategy. He thought about business records requested by mail on the 2nd week without announcement. He thought they said she would destroy my ranch. He thought she has been protecting it since before she knew the terrain. He put the document down. Send the orders to the alternative suppliers, he said. Use the pricing in the comparison document and start moving the primary supply relationships gradually so the change isn't visible. I'll start this week, she said. Good, he said. She picked up the document. She went back to the supply projections. He sat at the table. He was going to say something. He held it for a moment. He said, Clara. She looked up. You came here 3 weeks ago, he said. Yes, she said. You've been doing this work for 3 weeks, he said. Yes, she said. He held the table. Why? He said. You didn't have to. The arrangement didn't require it. She held the document. She thought about it honestly. Because this ranch is being threatened by someone who is patient and systematic, she said. And the response to patient systematic threat is patient systematic defense. She held his gaze. And because... She stopped. Because, he said. Because it's my home now, she said. Whatever brought me here, and whatever the original terms were, this is where I am, and this is what I'm part of, and someone is trying to take it. She held his gaze. I don't let people take things I'm part of. I have some experience with that. He held the table. He thought about an uncle who had taken an inheritance, and a woman who had spent 6 years in other people's households with nothing of her own. He thought about the specific quality of someone who had learned through experience what it cost to let people take things. He said, "All right." She went back to the supply projections. He stayed at the table. He thought about one rule he had built his life around for 8 years. Never trust what can be taken away. He thought there are things that cannot be taken away. He thought capability cannot be taken. He thought the specific kind of intelligence that builds a supply analysis in 3 weeks from mail-order business records cannot be taken. He thought the woman across this table cannot be taken. He thought I may have had the rule slightly wrong. The fence in the rain happened on a Saturday in November. He had been expecting the first real cold for 2 days. The mountains read differently in November, not just colder, but the specific quality of cold that meant the season was done negotiating. He had work to do on the south boundary fence before the ground froze work he had scheduled for Monday, but that the weather was going to move up. He was in the barn when the rain started. He was calculating whether the south fence could wait 1 more day when he came out to get a tool and found Clara at the fence. She had found the broken section he had been planning to address. She was in the rain, in working clothes she had acquired at some point because her St. Louis clothes were insufficient, with her hands in the specific position of someone who had learned fence repair in the past 3 weeks and was applying it. He watched her. Her hands were shaking. Not from fear, from cold and effort. "Why are you doing this?" he said. She looked up from the fence. "Because it needed doing before the freeze," she said. "I was going to do it Monday," he said. "The weather isn't going to wait for Monday," she said. He held the tool he had come out to get. She went back to the fence. He crossed the yard. He said, "Let me do it." "I'm almost done," she said. "You're shaking," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm almost done." He held the tool. He watched her finish. She finished the fence section. She straightened up. She was wet through, and the shaking was more visible now that she had stopped. She looked at the fence. She looked at him. "Why are you looking at me like that?" she said. He held the tool. "Like what?" he said. "Like you don't know what to make of me," she said. He held the tool. He said, "I said you wouldn't survive this ranch." "You did," she said. "On the first day," he said. "At the station." "I remember," she said. He held the tool. "I was wrong," he said. She held his gaze. The rain was still coming down. Neither of them moved. She said, "Caleb." "Yes," he said. "That is the first time you've said you were wrong about something," she said. He held the tool. "Yes," he said. She held his gaze. She said, "Thank you." Not for the compliment. He understood that from her tone she was not thanking him for changing his assessment. She was thanking him for saying it out loud. They went inside. She made hot coffee. He sat at the table. She sat across from him. They held their cups. He said, "Tell me about the uncle." She held her cup. She looked at it. "He was my father's brother," she said. "My father trusted him. The business, the estate, all of it. He said my father had left him in charge, and that there was nothing for me because the debts had taken everything." She held her cup. "I was 22. I didn't know enough about accounts to question it." She held her cup. "I know enough now." "What would you do differently?" he said. "If you could go back." She held her cup. "I would have made a copy of the books on the day he arrived," she said, "before he could change anything. And I would have taken them to an attorney immediately rather than trusting the family to manage it fairly." She held his gaze. But I was 22, and I didn't understand that trusting people who had not earned trust was a choice with consequences. He held his cup. He thought I understand that particular lesson. He said, "My wife died 8 years ago, my son with her. There was a fever, and then a storm, and I was on the mountain when it happened." He held his cup. By the time I got back, they were both gone. She held her cup. She held it with both hands. She said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "That's not your fault." "No," he said. "But I carry it like it is." She held her cup. She looked at him. "I know," she said. "I can see that you carry it." He held his cup. "How?" he said. "The way you run the ranch," she said. "Like every failure is a failure you were responsible for preventing. Like if you are disciplined enough and controlled enough and never depend on anything that can change, nothing will change without your consent." She held his gaze. "That's not how you manage a business. That's how you manage grief." He held his cup. The kitchen was very quiet. The rain outside was doing what rain did. He started. "I know it's direct," she said. "I'll stop if you'd prefer." "No," he said. "Don't stop." She held her cup. She held his gaze. "You can't control everything," she said. "You know that. You've always known that. The thing you've been doing is making sure you don't have to care about the things you can't control." She held her cup. "If you don't have anything you love, you can't lose anything you love." He held his cup. He thought, "She has been here 3 weeks. He thought, and she has seen this. He thought, I have been living with this for 8 years, and I haven't said it to anyone." He said, "Yes, just that." She held his gaze. She did not make more of it than it needed to be. She said, "The supply orders for the alternative suppliers need to go out by end of next week to arrive before the December inventory." He held his cup. He understood what she was doing. She was giving him a way back from the edge of the conversation, without requiring that the conversation conclude with anything being resolved. She was being efficient. She was also being kind. He was beginning to understand those were not always different things. "I'll review the orders tomorrow," he said. She nodded. She held her cup. He held his. Outside, the rain was still coming down. Inside, the kitchen was warm. He thought about 8 years and 1 rule, and what it meant when someone came along who saw through the rule to what was underneath it. He thought about a woman who had turned her back on a difficult horse and waited. He thought that is what she does with people too. She turns her back on the direct approach, because direct approach doesn't work. She simply waits. She is going to be very patient. He thought, I may have met someone as patient as I am. He held his cup. He held his coffee. He thought the town of Millhaven said she would destroy my ranch. He thought, in 3 weeks, she has found a corruption in my supply chain, documented a strategic threat developed. Countermeasures I hadn't considered repaired a fence in the rain before I knew it needed repairing and told me the truth about something I've been running from for 8 years. He thought that is not destruction. He thought I don't have a word for what that is. He would find one. He was not in a hurry. He held his cup. She held hers. The rain kept coming. He would find one, and the rain kept coming that Saturday, and they held their cups at the kitchen table, and the word he was looking for was not a word he would find that night, or the next week, or even in the weeks after that, because the thing Clara Whitmore was to the Stone Ranch, and to Caleb Stone himself, was not something that fit neatly into language he had been using. He worked on finding it. He watched what she did while he worked on it. She was different in December than she had been in October. Not different in the fundamental qualities, she was still the same Clara, who turned her back on a difficult horse, and waited, who found things in accounts that he had missed, who repaired fences in rain, and did not mention it afterward. Those were constant. What changed was the ease. She moved through this ranch in December, the way she had moved through the kitchen on the first night, with the efficiency of someone who understood the space and had stopped thinking about understanding it. She was past the learning stage and into the doing stage. And the doing stage suited her considerably better because it allowed her to move at the pace she actually moved at, rather than the pace of acquisition. She was fast. He had not expected that. He had understood from the beginning that she was intelligent. Intelligence was visible early if you were paying attention. But the speed with which she converted intelligence into practical competence was something he had not anticipated, and he found himself revising upward at regular intervals. The cattle knew her by December. Not the easy knowing, the deeper kind, where the animal stops treating you as a variable and starts treating you as a constant. It took most people a full season to achieve that with a herd. She had done it in 8 weeks. She had done it by watching, by asking one question at a time, by not rushing. He had watched her do it and had recognized the method because it was his method applied to a different domain. He thought we learn things the same way. He thought that is unusual. The first snowfall came on December 3rd. Not the killing kind, not yet. The mountains held back the true winter for another few weeks after the first light snow, as if showing you what was coming before they committed to it fully. Caleb had lived through 15 Montana winters on this property, and he knew the pattern. The first snow was a warning. The second snow 2 or 3 weeks later was the actual beginning. He told Clara this. She received it the way she received all information, as something to incorporate and act on. She spent the 3 weeks between the first and second snows making sure every system the ranch had was prepared for the second snow. The supply stores, the animal shelters, the firewood in the proper position against the south wall, the medical supplies for the cattle which she had reorganized in October and expanded in November, and which now reflected a far more comprehensive approach than the reactive one he had been using. He reviewed what she had done. He made 2 additions. She made a note of the additions. This was how they worked. Now, not by division of territory, though there was that too, but by the specific collaboration of 2 people who had figured out each other's patterns and had stopped requiring that the patterns be announced. He thought this is what a partner looks like. He thought I forgot that partners looked like this. The second snow came on December 19th. He woke that morning and felt it before he looked out the window. The specific quality of the air, the weight of the silence, the way the cabin held itself differently against what was outside. He had learned to read those things the way he had learned to read the mountain and the livestock and the accounts. He got up. Clara was already in the kitchen. She looked at him when he came in. "Today?" she said. "Yes," he said. She poured coffee. They sat at the table. He said, "This is the real one." "I know," she said. "I read your weather notes from the past 4 years." He held his coffee. "My weather notes," he said. "The journal in the study," she said. "You record conditions, dates, duration, impact on the operation. 4 years of data." She held her coffee. "I've been reading it." "Since when?" he said. "Since the second week," she said. He held his coffee. He thought about a journal he kept in the study for his own reference that he had not mentioned to her. He thought about a woman who had found it and read it systematically, and had not mentioned that she'd found it. "What did you learn from it?" he said. "The December-January window is when you lose most," she said. "Not the cattle specifically, the systems. Feed storage, access. Water access, the north boundary fence. 3 of the 4 significant losses in 4 years were infrastructure rather than animal." She held his gaze. "I've been preparing for the infrastructure." He held his coffee. "Show me," he said. She showed him. She had over the past 3 weeks addressed every infrastructure vulnerability he had noted in 4 years of records. Not all of them dramatically. Some of the preparations were small, specific, targeted at the exact failure points he had recorded, but comprehensively. He reviewed what she had prepared. He found one gap. He pointed it out. She said, "I know about that one. I need your help with it." "Why didn't you ask?" he said. "I was waiting until you had reviewed everything else first," she said. "So the conversation would be efficient." He held the documentation. He thought she planned this conversation. He thought she knew I would review the preparations in order, and that there would be one gap, and she waited until the review was complete to address the gap because the complete review provided the context for the gap conversation. He thought that is a level of planning I have not encountered in another person before. He said, "Show me the gap." She showed him. It was the water access on the north slope, a vulnerability he had known about for 2 years, and had been managing with temporary solutions because the permanent solution required specific equipment he had not prioritized. She had identified a different approach that used what they had rather than what they were missing. "Will it hold through the winter?" he said. "Through December and January," she said. February is the question. If February comes in the way the last 2 Februaries have, we'll need the equipment. "I'll order it in January when we know what February looks like," he said. "I've already priced it," she said. He held the documentation. "Of course you have," he said. She held her coffee. She held the ghost of something at the corners of her expression. "Is that a problem?" she said. "No," he said. "It's efficient." She went back to the preparations. He sat at the table. He thought, "I have been running this ranch for 8 years. He thought, "She has been here 8 weeks, and she has improved it in ways I did not think to improve it." He thought, "That is not what I expected." He thought about the town of Millhaven. He thought about Victor Harrington at the kitchen table in November. He thought about what destroy meant. He thought they were so wrong. The storm trapped them on December 23rd. Not unexpected, the weather had been building for 2 days, and he had made the preparations that needed making, and had told Clara what to expect in the specific practical language he used for things that required preparation rather than emotion. She had listened. She had prepared. And then the storm arrived anyway, and was worse than either of them had expected. The cattle were in all of them, which was Clara's achievement, more than his, because she had started moving them 3 days before he would have started, and had had them secure before the worst of it arrived. The cabin held. The supplies were sufficient because she had been anticipating a bad December since October. What was not anticipated was the northern cattle. He had a small herd on the upper north pasture, 10 head held there, because the grass was better through mid-December, and because moving them earlier created complications with the lower pasture. He had planned to bring them down the day before the storm, which was the day the storm arrived instead of the day after. He realized it at 4 in the afternoon when the storm had committed fully. He told Clara. She held her coffee. "All 10, she said. "All 10, he said. She held her coffee. She looked at the window. The wind was substantial. "I'll go," he said. She looked at him. "Caleb." "I'll go," he said. He put on his coat. He put on the additional layers that Montana winter required and that she had reorganized into a specific accessible system in November. He checked his equipment. He looked at her. She was holding her own coat. "No," he said. "I know the North Trail," she said. "I've been on it 6 times. "Not in this," he said. "I'm not suggesting we both go," she said. "I'm suggesting I go." He held the door. "No," he said. She held her coat. She held his gaze. She said, "Caleb, if you don't come back, I'm alone on this ranch in December with a storm." He held the door. "I'll come back," he said. "You don't know that," she said. "And neither do I." She held his gaze. "Let me come." He held the door. He held the door for a long moment. He said, "Stay 20 yards behind me. Don't move faster than I move. If I signal stop, you stop and you stay stopped." "Yes," she said. They went out. The North Trail took 40 minutes in good weather. It took 2 hours in the storm. He found the cattle. The cattle were unhurt. They had found shelter against the North Ridge overhang, which was the thing that had saved them, the instinct of animals who understood their terrain. He and Clara drove them. It took another hour to get them down. By the time the cattle were secure, the light was gone. He was checking the last of the fence when he heard it. Not a crack. A sound below. A crack, the specific sound of old wood that has been holding weight for too long, giving up. He looked up. The tree was on the north slope above the fence line. It was coming down in the wrong direction. He moved. He was fast. He was not fast enough. The tree did not hit him directly. It hit the fence post he was standing beside, which sent the post into his left side with the force of the impact, and he went down into the snow. He got his hands under himself. He pushed. The snow was deep enough that pushing was not straightforward. He assessed himself in the specific way he had learned from years of injuries in difficult places, cataloging what worked and what didn't. Left side hurt. Ribs. He had broken ribs before, and he knew the specific quality of that pain, and this was in that category. He pushed again. He got one knee under himself. He said, "I'm all right." Clara was beside him before he finished the sentence, not from behind where she was supposed to be. She had been moving when the sound happened. She had moved faster than the signal. He started to say something about that. She said, "Not now." She got her shoulder under his arm. She got him to his feet. "Can you walk?" she said. "Yes," he said. "Then walk," she said. They walked. It took 40 minutes to get back to the cabin. He was aware during those 40 minutes of several things simultaneously. He was aware of the pain, which was informative about the extent of the injury. He was aware of Clara's shoulder under his arm, which was providing more structural support than her size suggested it could provide. He was aware of the specific quality of her walking. Controlled, steady, not compensating in the jerky way of someone who was frightened, but compensating in the smooth way of someone who had decided that a particular thing needed to happen and was making it happen. He was aware that she had moved before the signal. He was aware that if she had not moved before the signal, he would have been slower to recover. He was aware that he was angry about the signal being ignored, and that the anger was not the primary thing he was feeling. They reached the cabin. She got him inside. She got him to the chair. She went to the medical supplies she had expanded in November. She came back. She said, "Where?" "Left side," he said. "Ribs." She said, "Shirt." He held the chair. She looked at him. "I need to see it," she said. "Caleb." He took the shirt off. She examined the ribs with the careful attention of someone who had prepared for this possibility rather than being surprised by it. "Not displaced," she said, "but broken. 2, maybe 3. She looked at him. "You need to stay still." "I need to." "I'll handle the cattle," she said. "Clara." "I will handle the cattle," she said. "Tell me what order." He told her what order. She did it. She came back in an hour. She came in cold and wet and went directly to the stove and made coffee and brought it to him and said, "Done." He held the coffee. He looked at her. "You moved before the signal," he said. "Yes," she said. "I told you to wait for the signal," he said. "Yes," she said. He held the coffee. "If you had waited for the signal," he started. "I know," she said. He held the coffee. He held it. He said, "Thank you." She held her coffee. She held it with both hands. She said, "Don't thank me for it." "Why not?" he said. "Because I didn't do it so you would thank me," she said. "I did it because you needed help." He held the coffee. "Clara," he said. "Yes," he said. He held the coffee. The fever started at midnight. He had known it might. The cold exposure and the injury and the hours in the snow were the conditions that produced fever, and he had been monitoring the signs since they got back. When it arrived decisively. Clara was awake. She had been awake, he realized. Coming back to consciousness in the early hours of the morning that she had been sitting beside him the entire time, monitoring, adjusting blankets, providing water when he could take it. He was aware of being very cold and very hot simultaneously. He was aware of her voice, not words at first. The sound of it, the specific, even quality she used for everything which was steady in the way of a thing that was not going to be destabilized by the situation it was in. He surfaced enough to hear words. She was talking about the supply projections. He understood after a moment what she was doing. She was giving his mind something specific and concrete to track. because a mind with nothing to track went to the dark places. She had noticed this. He held on to the supply projections. He surfaced further. He said, "Clara." She said, "Yes, I'm here." He held the blanket. He said, "After my family died, I built this ranch because it was the only thing I knew how to do, and because if I stopped doing something I would have to feel what I was feeling." She said, "Yes." He held the blanket. "The rule I had," he said, "never trust what can be taken away. I thought it was wisdom." He held the blanket. "I think it was fear." She held his hand. He felt her hold it. He said, "You are not what I expected." She said, "I know." He said, "I don't mean the ranch. I mean—" He stopped. The fever made the language harder. I thought I knew what people could be taken from me. I did not account for the possibility that someone would come here and become something that could not be taken." She was quiet. He held the blanket. He said, "That's what you've become." She held his hand. She said, "Caleb." He said, "Yes." She said, "You don't have to say anything else tonight." He said, "I know." He held the blanket. He held her hand. He said, "You are not going to leave." She said, "No." He said, "Not because Harrington wants you to." She said, "No." He said, "Not because the town expects you to." She said, "No." He held her hand. He said, "Why?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Because this is the first place in 6 years that has asked for exactly what I actually have to give." He held that. He held it through the fever and through the long night and into the gray morning when the storm had eased enough to let the light through. When the fever broke, Clara was asleep in the chair beside him. She had stayed the whole night. He lay and looked at the ceiling. He thought about 8 years. He thought about a rule. He thought about what it meant when something came along that the rule had not accounted for. He thought, "I have been building walls." He thought she walked through them before I noticed she was doing it. He thought not by force. He thought by being exactly what she is, which is something I had no wall for. He thought about the town of Millhaven and their prophecy. He thought about Victor Harrington and his strategies. He thought about a woman who had arrived in October with a leather case and a traveling coat, and had been here 9 weeks, and had changed every calculation he had been running. He thought they said she would destroy my ranch. He thought what she has destroyed is the version of my life that was smaller than it needed to be. He thought I am going to need a different rule. He was still working on the rule when she woke. She looked at him. She said, "Fever's gone." "Yes," he said. She stood up. She said, "Coffee." She went to make coffee. He lay in the bed. He heard the familiar sounds of her in the kitchen, the specific efficiency of her movements, the pattern of them, the sounds of someone who understood the space they were in. He thought, I have been alone for 8 years, and that kitchen has been quiet for 8 years. He thought it has been 9 weeks since it was quiet. He thought I would like it to not be quiet again. He thought that is the new rule. He held the blanket. He held the specific warmth of having decided something. She came back with the coffee. She handed it to him. He held it. He looked at her. She held her own cup. She looked back at him. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "You're looking at me like you're working something out," she said. "I am," he said. She held her cup. "Will you tell me when you've worked it out?" she said. "Yes," he said. She held her cup. "All right," she said. She sat in the chair beside him. She drank her coffee. He drank his. Outside, the Montana winter was doing what it did. Inside, the kitchen was warm, and the coffee was made, and the cattle were secure because she had made sure of it, and the ribs were broken but manageable, and the fever was gone, and Caleb Stone was working out a new rule. It was going to be a better rule than the last one. He was fairly certain of that. He held his coffee. She held hers. Neither of them said anything. They didn't need to, and they held their coffee in the quiet of the cabin, while the Montana winter worked at the walls outside, and the ribs made themselves known every time he breathed, And Caleb Stone thought about a new rule, while Clara Whitmore thought about the inspection that was now 4 months away and what they needed to do to be ready for it. He recovered in 2 weeks. Not comfortably broken ribs did not accommodate comfort, and he was not a patient who accommodated restriction, and there were 3 separate occasions in the first week where she told him to stay down, and he told her he was fine, and she said that his assessment of his own condition was not the relevant assessment, and he stayed down. He stayed down, not because she was right about his condition, which she was, but because he had decided during the fever that the new rule he was working on was going to require him to accept some things he had been refusing to accept, and accepting medical guidance from the person who had kept him alive to require him to accept some things he had been refusing to accept, and accepting medical guidance from the person who had kept him alive through a December night on a Montana mountain seemed like a reasonable place to start. She noticed the change. She did not comment on it. She was like that. By the 2nd week of January, he was functional. By the 3rd week, he was operational. By the end of January, he had identified the shift in Victor Harrington's strategy before Harrington had fully deployed it. He would not have been able to do this alone. Clara had been tracking the supply chain for 3 months and had built a picture of Harrington's network that was considerably more detailed than anything Caleb had been maintaining. When the first sign of the new approach appeared, a letter from the Territorial Land Office requesting clarification of certain operational details in the Stone Ranch claimed she had the context to understand what it meant immediately. She brought the letter to him at the table. She sat across from him. She said, "This is the new approach." He read the letter. He looked at her. "It's an administrative filing," he said. "Requesting clarification of the household operation records." "Yes," she said. "Which is unusual in January," he said. "Very unusual," she said. "The inspection is in April. A clarification request in January would normally come from an inspector preparing their visit." She held his gaze. "This didn't come from an inspector. The name at the bottom is a land office administrator named Putnam." He held the letter. "How do you know the inspectors' names?" he said. "I requested a list of Territorial Land Office personnel in November," she said. "By mail." He held the letter. "You requested Territorial Land Office personnel records in November," he said. "I thought it might be useful to know who the relevant people were," she said. He held the letter. He thought about a woman who had been on this ranch for 3 weeks in November and had already requested Territorial Land Office personnel records by mail. He thought, "I have been underestimating how far ahead she plans." He thought, "That is a pattern I should stop." "Putnam," he said. "Who is Putnam?" She had a document in her other hand. She had brought 2 things to this conversation. She put the second document on the table. He looked at it. Theodore Putnam, Land Office Administrator, Territory of Montana. His professional history, his connections. The names he appeared alongside in public records. Victor Harrington's name was in the 3rd paragraph. "Harrington has a relationship with the Land Office Administrator," Caleb said. "Through a business arrangement that is 3 years old," she said. "Putnam's brother owns a hardware supply business that has a contract with Harrington's main operation." He held the documents. "Clara," he said. "Yes," he said. "When did you find this?" he said. 3 weeks ago," she said. He held the documents. "Before Harrington deployed the strategy," he said. "Before the letter arrived," she said. "I didn't have confirmation that this was the approach until the letter came. But I had the relationship documented." He held the documents. "You found the relationship before it was used," he said. "I built a picture," she said. "I told you that's what I do." He held the documents. "What do we do with this?" he said. "We respond to the letter," she said. "We provide the clarification requested in full. Every detail of the household operation, everything that demonstrates this is a genuine family operation meeting the claim requirements." She held his gaze. "And then we provide additional documentation that was not requested." "What additional documentation?" he said. "The Putnam-Harrington connection," she said. "Documented and attached, not as an accusation, as additional context that we feel the inspector reviewing our claim should be aware of." He held the documents. He thought about that. That's a specific move, he said. Yes, she said. It tells Harrington that we know about the connection. It tells the land office that we know about the connection. And it makes the administrative request look exactly like what it is, an attempt to create a technical problem in our claim through a compromised channel. She held his gaze. If they proceed with any action based on Putnam's involvement, they have to explain why they proceeded despite our disclosure. He held the documents. You've been preparing this for 3 weeks, he said. Since I found the connection, she said. He held the documents. He looked at her. He said, I spent 8 years running this ranch alone. She held his gaze. I know, she said. I thought running it alone was necessary, he said. I know, she said. It wasn't the right analysis, he said. She held his gaze. She said nothing. She was letting him say the thing without interrupting it. The analysis was based on a specific kind of loss, he said, where everything I depended on was taken, and I concluded that depending on things was the error. He held the documents. The error was not depending on things. The error was not understanding which things could not be taken. She held his gaze. She still said nothing. Your work cannot be taken from you, he said. Your capacity to find a Putnam-Harrington connection in November when Harrington hasn't deployed it yet. Your capacity to turn that finding into a specific strategic response 3 weeks before you need it. He held her gaze. That is yours. It goes where you go. She held his gaze. She said, yes. He held the documents. I don't want to run this ranch alone anymore, he said. She held his gaze for a long time. She said, You've been saying that in parts for 2 months. He held the documents. I know, he said. This is the first time you've said it directly, she said. Yes, he said. She held his gaze. She said, I know. He looked at the documents. Let's respond to Putnam, he said. She was already drafting it. She had been drafting it for 3 weeks. She showed him the draft. He read it. He made 2 changes. She made a note of the changes. He said, When does this go out? Tomorrow morning, she said. I want 1 more day to confirm a detail in the Putnam documentation. What detail? He said. I want to confirm that the Putnam-Harrington connection predates Caleb's claim registration, she said. If it does, it suggests the relationship was in place before the claim was filed and strengthens the implication that this has been a planned interference rather than an independent administrative concern. He held the draft. Does it predate the claim? He said. I believe so, she said. I'm confirming it. By mail, he said. By mail, she said. He held the draft. He thought about a woman who had been requesting mail documentation continuously since the 2nd week of October and had been building a picture for 3 months and had arrived at the kitchen table today with exactly what he needed. He thought I wrote to a marriage agency in January, asking for a ranch woman. He thought what I have is something I did not know how to ask for because I did not know it existed. He put the draft down. Clara, he said. Yes, he said. He held the table. He said, I need to tell you something that I have been working out since December. She held her coffee. She held his gaze. Tell me, she said. He held the table. I told you during the fever that you had become something that couldn't be taken, he said. I meant that. I have been thinking about what it means. He held the table. I have been building this ranch as a monument to not needing anything, because the things I needed were taken, and I could not survive losing something like that again. He held her gaze. And then you came. And in 9 weeks, you have become completely essential to this operation, and to how I understand this operation, and to how I think. He held her gaze. And I have been waiting to feel afraid about that. She held her coffee. And, she said, I don't feel afraid, he said. I've been waiting for it, and it hasn't arrived. He held her gaze. I think I understand why. She held her coffee. She held his gaze. "Tell me," she said. "Because you are not something that happened to me," he said. "You are someone who arrived here and chose this ranch, and chose to understand it, and chose to protect it. The choosing is yours. You keep choosing it. Every day." He held her gaze. "That is different from what I lost. What I lost was something that was taken from me without warning, without my participation, without any choice involved. What you are is a person who keeps choosing to be here." He held her gaze. "I can't lose that the way I lost the other thing." She held her coffee. She was very still. She said, "That's true." "Yes, well," he said. She held his gaze. She said, "Caleb." "Yes," he said. "I need to tell you something in return," she said. "Tell me," he said. She held her coffee. She held it with both hands the way she held things she was working through. "When I took the ticket in October," she said, "I was not running toward something. I was running away from an arrangement I had been in for 6 years, where I was very useful and completely invisible." She held his gaze. "I had been valuable enough to keep and not valuable enough to matter. And I thought that was what I was, a particular kind of useful that did not rise to the level of mattering." She held her coffee. "I thought I was coming here to be useful in a different place." He held the table. "And?" he said. She held his gaze. "And you told me on the first day that you needed a ranch woman with experience," she said. "And I was not that. And you let me stay anyway and watched what I was and responded to what I was rather than what you had asked for." She held his gaze. "You are the first person in 6 years who has looked at what I actually am and treated it as something that mattered rather than something that was sufficient." He held the table. He held her gaze. "It matters," he said. She held her coffee. She held it for a long moment. She put it down. She said, "Send the letter to the land office with both attachments." He held the table. He said, "Yes." She picked up the draft. She stood up. "I need to confirm the Putnam date," she said. She went to the study. He sat at the table. He thought about what she had said. He thought about a woman who had believed she was a particular kind of useful that did not rise to the level of mattering. He thought about 6 years of other people's households. He thought about the specific quality of being essential to a place and invisible in it. He thought, "I have been treating this ranch the way her uncle treated her inheritance." He thought, "I had something valuable, and I called it sufficient." He thought, "That is the error I have been making." The confirmation came from the territorial records 2 days later. The Putnam-Harrington connection predated the Stone Ranch claim by 14 months. She brought the confirmation to him at breakfast. She put it on the table. She said, 14 months. He read it. He put it down. He said, "It was planned before I filed." "Yes," she said. "The relationship was in place before you filed the claim. Which means either the plan to interfere was also in place before you filed, or the relationship predating the claim is a coincidence." She held his gaze. "It is not a coincidence." He held the confirmation. "Harrington knew about the Upper Valley water rights before I did," he said. "He may have known before you bought the land," she said. "The railroad expansion planning has been in progress for 6 years. If Harrington had access to the railroad planning information, he would have known about the water rights value before the general public." He held the confirmation. He thought about the sequence. He thought about a man who had been watching this land for potentially 6 years. He thought about the marriage arrangement requirement and the land office administrator and the supply chain connections. He thought about a strategy that had been in development for years and that had been waiting for him to make a mistake. He said, "He has been patient." "Yes," she said, "but patience is most effective against someone who is operating alone. When you're operating alone, you can only see what you're looking at. Everything else is vulnerability." She held his gaze. "You weren't alone when this arrived." He held the confirmation. He held her gaze. "No," he said. "I wasn't." The letter with both attachments went to the land office that day. Harrington's response came faster than she had projected. She had said 2 weeks. It came in 4 days, not through official channels. Harrington came in person. He arrived on a Tuesday morning when Caleb was in the upper pasture and Clara was in the study working on the April inspection documentation. Walt, one of the seasonal hands who had come back for the spring work, came to the study door and said, "Harrington, with 2 men." She closed the documentation. She went to the door. Harrington stood in the yard with 2 men who had the specific quality of legal, rather than physical, not ranch hands, men with paper in their coats. He looked at her. He said, "Mrs. Stone, I need to speak with Caleb." "He's in the upper pasture," she said. "I can take a message." Harrington held his hat. He looked at the 2 men. He looked at her. "This is a legal matter," he said. "I'd prefer to speak with Caleb directly." "You can speak with Caleb through Caleb's attorney," she said. "Or you can speak with me now. Those are the options." Harrington held his hat. He had not expected this. She could see him recalibrating. He said, "Mrs. Stone, the letter you sent to the land office contained certain implications that are documented," she said. He held his hat. "The implications in question are not," he started. "Victor," she said. He stopped. She had used his first name. He had not expected that either. She said, "You have been working on a strategy to acquire the water rights to the Upper Valley for at least 6 years. The strategy has involved building a relationship with a territorial land office administrator whose brother has a business contract with your operation. That relationship predates Caleb's land claim by 14 months. She held his gaze. "The documentation of that relationship is now in the land office file for this claim. It is also in the possession of Caleb's attorney." She held his gaze. "Any action taken through the land office from this point forward will be evaluated in the context of that documentation." Harrington held his hat. He was very still. One of the men with him had taken out paper. She said, "Your associate is welcome to take notes." Harrington looked at the man with the paper. The man put the paper away. Harrington looked at Clara. He said, "You are not what I expected." "So I've been told," she said. He held his hat. He said, "The town said you would destroy Caleb Stone." "I know," she said. He held his hat. He looked at the ranch, at the organized yard, at the barn with the new east hinge, at the woodpile against the south wall. He said, "They were wrong." "Yes," she said. He held his hat. He said, "The inspection is in April." "I'm aware," she said. He held his hat. He looked at her for a long time. He made a decision. She could see the decision being made, the specific moment of a man who has found that the position he has held for 6 years is no longer viable and is deciding whether to maintain it at greater cost or find a different position. He said, "Good morning, Mrs. Stone." He left. The 2 men left with him. Clara stood in the doorway. She watched them ride down the road. Walt behind her said, "What just happened?" "He recalculated," she said. Walt said nothing. She went back to the inspection documentation. Caleb came down from the upper pasture 2 hours later. Walt met him at the barn and told him. He came to the study. She was at the desk. He stood in the doorway. He said, "Walt said Harrington came." "Yes," she said. "With 2 men," he said. "Yes," she said. He held the door frame. "What happened?" he said. She told him. He held the door frame. He said, "You told him directly, everything we had on him." "Yes," she said. "Why?" he said. "Because he already knew we had it," she said. "We sent the letter. The information was in the land office file. He came here to assess what we would do with the information, which tells me he was considering whether we would push it forward or hold it." She held his gaze. "I told him directly, so he understands we will push it forward. That assessment changes his calculations significantly." He held the door frame. "He said you weren't what he expected," he said. "He said that," she said. He held the door frame. He said, "He's right." She held his gaze. She said, "What did you expect when you sent the letter in January?" He held the door frame. He thought about January. He thought about the letter. He thought about what he had specified and what he had received and how thoroughly wrong his specification had been. He said, "I expected someone capable of doing what you do. I did not expect the scale on which you do it." She held his gaze. "The scale was necessary," she said. "The threat was larger than you knew." "The threat was larger than I knew," he said, "because I didn't know to look for it the way you looked for it." She held his gaze. 6 years of other people's households, she said. You learn to see what people are actually doing rather than what they say they're doing. He held the doorframe. "Your uncle," he said. "My uncle," she agreed. He held the doorframe. He came into the study. He sat in the other chair. He held his hands. He said, "Clara." "Yes," he said. He held his hands. He said, "I have been building a monument to not needing anything for 8 years. And in 4 months, you have made it irrelevant." She held her pen. She held his gaze. "Not irrelevant," she said. "The discipline you built was real. The operation you built was real. The knowledge you accumulated was real." She held his gaze. "I didn't replace what you built. I added to it." He held his hands. "Yes," he said. She held her pen. She said, "Caleb." "Yes," he said. She said, "I'm going to say something directly, because that's what I do." "Yes," he said. She held her pen. She held his gaze. She said, "I don't want to be useful to someone who doesn't matter to me. I've done that for 6 years, and it is the most specific kind of exhausting I know." She held his gaze. "I came here to be useful, and what happened instead is that I am here. Not useful to you. Here with you." She held his gaze. "I want you to understand the difference." He held her gaze. He said, "I understand the difference." She held her pen. She held his gaze. "Good," she said. She went back to the inspection documentation. He sat in the other chair. He thought about the inspection in April. He thought about everything she had been building toward it. He thought about a man on a horse riding down the road, having recalculated his 6-year strategy. He thought she made that happen. He thought she made all of this happen. He thought the town of Millhaven was so completely, so absolutely, so thoroughly wrong. He thought I was also wrong. He thought I was wrong about what I needed. He thought, and I got it anyway. He held that. It was a good thing to hold. The April inspection was coming, and they were going to be ready, which was not a hope or a projection, but a fact established by 6 months of work that Clara had been building since before she fully understood what the April inspection would require. Because she had read 4 years of weather journals and 3 years of account records, and had understood what this ranch needed before most people would have understood where they were sleeping. She had been preparing for April since November. February came in, the way the journal said. February came hard, structural, cold, that settled into the bones of the ranch and required everything you had to stay ahead of it. She stayed ahead of it. The water access on the north slope held through December and January the way she had calculated it would. February was the question. The question answered itself in the specific way that good preparation answered questions by making them manageable rather than eliminating them entirely. It held, not without work. There were mornings in February where the work required before 6 was the kind that tested whether a person had the reserves the mountain required. She had the reserves. She drew on them and replenished them and did not mention the drawing in the way she did not mention most things that were simply what the situation required. Caleb noticed. He noticed the way he noticed everything about the ranch systematically, with the specific attention of someone who had been paying attention to the same things for a long time. He had added her to the list of things he paid attention to sometime in November without deciding to, and he had been keeping track of what she required and what she was giving, and whether those two things were in balance. They were approaching the edge of balance in February. He said so on a February morning when she came in from the North Slope work with hands that told the story of 2 hours in that specific cold. He said, "Sit." She sat without argument, which was itself information. He made coffee. He sat across from her. He said, "The North Slope." Still holding, she said. I know, he said. I checked before you came in. She held her coffee. Then what? She said. He held his coffee. He said, how long can you maintain this pace? She held her coffee. She thought about it the way she thought about operational questions honestly, without performance. Through April, she said. I'll need a week after the inspection. A week of what? He said. A week where I sleep past 5, she said. And don't read account records in the evening. He held his coffee. He said, you can have the week now. I can't have the week now, she said. The inspection is 8 weeks away, and the March preparation starts next week. I know when the inspection is, he said. She held her coffee. She held his gaze. Caleb, she said. Yes, he said. I know what my limits are, she said. I have been managing difficult situations on insufficient resources for 6 years. I know the difference between working hard and approaching my limits. She held his gaze. I am working hard. I am not approaching my limits. When I approach my limits, I will tell you. That is also what I do. He held his coffee. He held it, and he thought about a woman who had repaired a fence in November rain and had not mentioned her hands until he had asked specifically. All right, he said. She drank her coffee. He drank his. After a while he said, what do you need that you don't have? She looked at him. For the inspection, she said. For February and March and April, he said. What is missing? She held her coffee. She thought about it. The permanent solution for the North Slope, she said. I said February was the question, and we've gotten through on the temporary approach, but the temporary approach is adding 40 minutes to the morning work. I ordered the equipment in January, he said. She looked at him. I know, he said. You said order it when we know what February looks like. I ordered it when we knew what February looked like. She held her coffee. It's not in the supply records, she said. I ordered it through a separate account, he said. She held her coffee. You have a separate account, she said. An emergency account, he said. I started it 3 years ago. It's not in the main records. She held her coffee. She held his gaze. She said, I've been working from the main records. Yes, he said. There are gaps in my picture because I don't have the full records, she said. Yes, he said. She held her coffee. That's inefficient, she said. Yes, he said. She held his gaze. Will you give me access to the other account? She said. That's why I'm telling you about it, he said. She held her coffee. She held his gaze for a long moment. She said, Caleb. Yes, he said. That is the first thing you've held back from the beginning, she said. He held his coffee. He held the table. He said yes. She said why? He held the table. He said, because it was the last reserve, the account I kept entirely separate, the thing that was entirely mine. She held her coffee. She held his gaze. She said, I know. Everyone holds one thing back, the last thing. The thing that feels like the line between trusting someone and trusting them with everything. She held his gaze. The fact that you're telling me now is what matters. He held his coffee. Yes, he said. She put her cup down. She stood up. She said, show me the records. He showed her. She went through them in an hour. She found 2 things. She noted them in the margins in the small, precise handwriting she used for things that were important. She said, these 2 items need to be in the main records. The separation creates a discrepancy that an inspector looking at both sets will notice. If Morrison is thorough, Morrison will be thorough, he said. Then we need them integrated before he arrives, she said. He held the records. He handed them to her. She went to integrate them. He stood in the study doorway and watched her go and thought about the last thing held back. He thought I gave her the last thing. He thought it felt exactly like what it was supposed to feel like. He thought that is either the new rule working or proof that the new rule was correct all along. He thought both. The twist came in March. She had been expecting something from Harrington since February. The man who had been building a strategy for 6 years did not recalculate once and stop. Recalculation was a pause, not a conclusion. She had been monitoring for what the next approach would be, and she had identified 3 likely channels and had been watching all 3. She had not been watching her uncle. She had not known Harrington was watching her uncle. The letter arrived on a Thursday. It was addressed to Clara specifically, not Caleb. Clara Whitmore Stone, with a St. Louis return address she recognized as a law office she had been careful to avoid. She held it on the front step for a long time before she opened it. She took it inside. She sat at the desk. She opened it. She read it. She put it down. She sat for approximately 10 minutes. She picked it up and read it again. Then she went to find Caleb. He was at the south fence. She walked to the south fence. He saw her coming, and he set down the tool he was holding, and he looked at her face and said, "What happened?" She handed him the letter. He read it. He read it twice. He said, "Harrington found your uncle." "Yes," she said. "And your uncle is willing to contact the land office today," he said. "My uncle is willing to do whatever Harrington is paying him to do," she said. "My uncle does not take initiative when someone else's money is available." He held the letter. What would he tell the land office? He said. She held her hands. She held them the way she held things that were difficult, not tight, just present. The specific stillness of someone managing something they hadn't managed before. She said, "There are questions he could raise about how I came to be here, about the circumstances of the agency arrangement, about whether the terms of the arrangement meet the household requirement." She held his gaze. None of them are valid questions, but valid questions are not required. Questions that create delay are sufficient. If Morrison receives a formal inquiry before he completes the inspection, he is obligated to hold the stamp. He held the letter. He said, "How long would a hold last?" "Weeks," she said. "Possibly months depending on what form the inquiry took." He held the letter. He said, "And Harrington knows this." "Harrington has been working with Putnam for 3 years," she said. "He understands the land office processes extremely well." He held the letter. He was quiet. She waited. He said, "What can your uncle actually offer, specifically? What does he know?" She held her hands. She held them and she looked at the fence line and she made the decision she had been approaching since she first saw the return address on the envelope. She said, "When I left St. Louis, I took a copy of my father's business records." He held the letter. He held very still. She said, "The records that document what my uncle did with the estate, the specific accounting of what was transferred and when, and to which accounts." She held his gaze. "I've had them for 18 months. He held the letter. "You've had documentation of your uncle's fraud for 18 months, he said. "Yes," she said. "And you haven't used it," he said. "The timing wasn't right," she said. He held the letter. He held her gaze. He said, "Clara." "Yes," he said. He said, "Why didn't you tell me?" She held her hands. She held them, and she thought about the last thing held back and what she had said to him about it, and what he had said about the emergency account. She said, "Because it was mine." He held the letter. He said, "The same reason." "Yes," she said, "the same reason." He held the letter. He held her gaze. He said, "Is it still yours?" She held her hands. She held them, and she thought about his question, and about what it meant, and about 6 months of shared coffee, and December nights, and February mornings, and account records, and the last things held back. She said, "No." He held the letter. "Where are the records?" he said. "In the study," she said. "In the trunk under the window." He held the letter. He said, "We use them." "Now," she said, "we send them today," he said, "by telegraph, before your uncle can move." "The attorney in St. Louis?" she started. "Do you have one?" he said. "I've been holding a name for 18 months, she said. "Then we send it today," he said. She held his gaze. "All right," he said. They went back to the cabin. She went to the trunk under the window. She had not opened the trunk in 6 months. She had carried it from St. Louis to the agency office to the train to Montana to this cabin, and she had not opened it because the timing was not right, and because she was waiting for the stable place she had come here to find. She opened it now. The records were there, 18 months in a trunk, and they were exactly as she had organized them by date by account by the specific entries that showed the transfers. 4 years of her uncle's work against her father's estate, documented in the accounting language that she had been learning since she was 14, and that she had applied to understanding what had been done to her with the specific attention of someone who needed the understanding for a purpose she had been building toward since October 1885. She took them out. She sat at the desk. She spent 2 hours composing the documentation package. Not just the records, the context, the timeline, the specific entries that required explanation, and the explanation those entries resisted. She gave it to Caleb to read. He read it. He said, "This is complete." "Yes," she said. "A St. Louis attorney looking at this," he started, "has everything they need," she said. "I've been building this case for 18 months. I know exactly what it shows." He held the documentation. He said, "Clara." "Yes," he said. He said, "You came to Montana to find somewhere stable enough to do this." "Yes," she said. He held the documentation. He said, "And then you found the ranch and decided the ranch was more important." She held her coffee. She said, "I found the ranch and found that both could be done. This and the ranch, they are not separate things." He held the documentation. "Why not?" he said. She said, "Because Harrington found my uncle, which means the two things I was managing separately have become one thing. My uncle's testimony and Harrington's strategy are the same attack." She held his gaze. "We address them together." He held the documentation. He said, "We send this today." "Today," she said. They sent it by telegraph. The telegraph went to the attorney whose name she had been holding for 18 months. It contained the essential summary and the promise of full documentation by express mail that afternoon. The express mail went out in the late afternoon. She had organized it in 3 hours. He had watched her organize it with the specific attention of someone who was revising every remaining assumption upward. At supper he said, "How long?" "Before the attorney moves on it," she said. "Before we know if it worked," he said. 2 weeks, she said. "If the attorney moves quickly. 10 days if he moves very quickly." He held his fork. He said, "And your uncle. If he receives communication from the attorney before he moves on the land office, he recalculates," she said. "Because what he has to offer Harrington is testimony against this ranch. What he has to lose is his protection from what he did to my father's estate." She held his gaze. "The documentation removes the protection. If there is no protection, there is no deal with Harrington." He held his fork. He said, "You've been thinking about this for 18 months. Since I organized the records," she said. "The analysis was always the same. What I needed was the right moment." He held his fork. He said, "The right moment was here." She held her coffee. She said, "The right moment was when the two things became the same thing." He held his fork. He looked at her. He said, "Clara." "Yes," he said. He held his fork. He said, "You carried your father's records in a trunk for 18 months. You came to Montana with them. You have been in this cabin since October with them under the window in the study. You have been managing the supply chain and the accounts and the Harrington situation and the Putnam connection and the winter and the North Slope and everything else, and underneath all of it, you have been carrying your father's estate in a trunk." She held her coffee. "Yes," she said. He said, "That is not a small thing to carry." She held her coffee. She said, "I've been carrying it long enough that it stopped feeling like carrying." He said, "What does it feel like now?" She held her coffee. She thought about it. She said, "Like putting something down." He held his fork. He said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "I understand that feeling." She held her coffee. She held his gaze. "I know," she said. They ate supper. The confirmation came in 11 days. 11 days, which meant the attorney had moved quickly, which meant the documentation was sufficient, which she had known, but which confirmation of confirmed. The letter was brief. The attorney had received the documentation. The documentation was compelling. Her uncle had been contacted by the attorney's office. Her uncle had withdrawn from any arrangement regarding the Stone Ranch claim. She read the letter at breakfast. She put it down. She said, "Done." He held his coffee. He said, "Your uncle will not testify against this ranch," she said. Without the protection Harrington was offering, the testimony costs him more than it gains. He held his coffee. He said, "Harrington loses his witness." "Yes," she said. He held his coffee. He said, "The documentation you've been carrying for 18 months." "Yes," she said. He held his coffee. He held her gaze. He said, "You used it to protect this ranch." She held her coffee. She said, "I used it because the right moment arrived." He held her gaze. He said, "The right moment was this ranch." She held her coffee. She said, "The right moment was here." He held his coffee. He held her gaze for a long time. He said, "Clara." "Yes," he said. He said, "I want to say something I've been working on since December." She held her coffee. She held his gaze. "Say it," she said. He held his coffee. He held the table. He said, "I built this ranch for 8 years on one rule. Never trust what can be taken away. I built the rule after I lost everything, and I built the ranch as the thing I would not lose, because I had made it hard enough to lose that the losing became unlikely." He held the table. The rule was wrong. She held her coffee. She did not say anything. She was letting him finish. He held the table. He said, "The rule was wrong because it was based on a misreading of what happened to me. I did not lose my family because I trusted them. I lost them because the mountain is the mountain, and winters are winters, and some things are not in anyone's control." He held the table. "The lesson I learned was not to trust. The lesson I should have learned was that some things are not in your control, and the right response to that is not to stop trusting, but to trust more carefully." She held her coffee. He held the table. He said, "You are what trusting more carefully looks like." She held her coffee. She held his gaze. She said, "Caleb." "Yes," he said. She said, "You trusted me with the North Slope and the accounts and the supply chain and the Harrington situation. You trusted me with your weather journals and your business records and eventually your emergency account." She held his gaze. "You trusted me with the story of your family and what the rule cost you and what the new rule might look like." She held his gaze. That is a considerable amount of trust for a man who built a rule against trusting. He held the table. He said, "Yes." She held her coffee. She said, "I want to tell you something in return." "Tell me," he said. She held her coffee. She held it with both hands. She said, "When I was 22 and my uncle arrived at my father's house, I did not fight. I watched him take what was mine, and I told myself that fighting required resources I did not have, and that the better strategy was to wait." She held her coffee. "I waited 6 years. And in those 6 years I built the case and organized the records and held the attorney's name and told myself the waiting was strategic." She held his gaze. It was also fear. He held the table. He held very still. She said, "I was afraid that if I moved on the documentation and failed, I would have nothing. The case would be gone, and the evidence would be gone, and my uncle would know I had tried and would be more careful afterward." She held her coffee. "So I waited until I was certain, and being certain took 6 years." He held the table. He said, "And now?" She said, "And now I have been here 6 months, and I am more certain than I have been in 6 years, and I sent the documentation by telegraph because the right moment arrived, and I was not afraid." He held the table. He said, "Why not afraid?" She held her coffee. She held his gaze. She said, "Because I am not alone." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, Montana in March was doing what it did. Inside, the coffee was warm. He held the table. She held her coffee. He said, "No, you're not." She held her coffee. She held his gaze. She said, "The April inspection is 6 weeks away." "Yes," he said. She said, "The North Slope equipment arrives next week." "Yes," he said. She said, "The Morrison preparation needs another week of documentation." "Yes," he said. She said, "We have 6 weeks." He held her gaze. "We have 6 weeks," he said. She put her coffee down. She went to get the inspection documentation. He held the table. He thought I spent 8 years building a monument to not needing anything. He thought, and she came in October with a leather case and a trunk full of her father's records, and 6 years of waiting for the right moment, and what she found when she arrived was that the right moment was here. He thought, and the right moment is still here. He thought it has been here since October. He thought it will keep being here. He went to help with the documentation. The April inspection arrived on a Tuesday. Inspector Morrison came from the east on horseback, which meant he had ridden from Millhaven, which meant the people of Millhaven had seen him go. The people of Millhaven had been watching the Stone Ranch for 6 months. They had been watching because they had been wrong, and they knew they had been wrong. And when people are wrong about something in a specific way, they either stop watching or they watch more carefully. The people of Millhaven had watched more carefully. Walt Greer at the feed store had the most information because he ran the feed store, and everyone passed through it, and everyone mentioned what they had heard or seen. He had been compiling a picture for 6 months. The picture he had compiled was not the picture he had expected to compile in October when he had said she won't last a month. Morrison arrived at the Stone Ranch at 9 in the morning. Clara was in the study with the documentation organized in the specific order she had determined Morrison would want to see it. She had determined this by requesting the standard inspection protocols from the Territorial Land Office by mail in November, and by cross-referencing the protocols with 4 years of Caleb's operational records to understand exactly which elements of which protocols applied to which aspects of which records. She had prepared for the Morrison inspection with the same method she had prepared for everything, by understanding what it was before it arrived. Morrison was 50 compact, with the specific professional manner of someone who had done this hundreds of times, and had retained the capacity for rigor without retaining enthusiasm for anything but accuracy. He looked at the ranch. He looked at the documentation. He looked at the cattle. He examined the water access. He reviewed the supply records. He went through the account books. He spent 4 hours. At the end of 4 hours, he sat at the kitchen table, and Clara put coffee in front of him without being asked, and he received it with the specific appreciation of a man who had been reviewing records for 4 hours on a cold April morning. He looked at his notes. He said, "The documentation is comprehensive." "Yes," Clara said. He said, "More comprehensive than I typically see." "I wanted to make sure everything relevant was available," she said. He looked at his notes. He said, "There's a note in the file from an administrator named Putnam." "Yes," she said. "With a disclosure attached," he said. "Yes," she said. He looked at his notes. He said, "The disclosure documents a business relationship between Putnam and a Victor Harrington." "Yes," she said. He looked at his notes. He held his coffee. He said, "You filed that disclosure?" "Yes," she said. He held his coffee. He said, "Why?" She held her coffee. She said, "Because the administrative inquiry that came through Putnam appeared to be related to the Harrington water rights matter, rather than to any genuine concern about our claim. I thought the relationship between Putnam and Harrington was relevant context for the person reviewing our documentation." He held his coffee. He looked at his notes. He said, "You identified the relationship between Putnam and Harrington." "Yes," she said. "How?" he said. "I requested a list of Territorial Land Office personnel in November," she said, "and compared those names against publicly available business registration records." He held his coffee. He held his notes. He held his coffee. He said, "November." "Yes," she said. He said, "The Putnam inquiry came in January." "Yes," she said. You identified the connection 2 months before the inquiry arrived, he said. Yes, she said. He held his coffee. He looked at his notes. He looked at Caleb. Caleb held his coffee and said nothing. Morrison held his notes. He said, Mrs. Stone. Yes, she said. He said, How long have you been at this ranch? 6 months, she said. He held his notes. He held his coffee. He held his notes. He said, 6 months. Yes, she said. He held his notes. He looked at the account records. He looked at the supply documentation. He looked at the operational history she had compiled. He looked at the winter preparation records. He looked at the livestock documentation. He looked at the water access records. He looked at all of it. He said, This is 6 months of work. Some of it is 8 years of work, she said. I organized it, but Caleb built the operation. He held his notes. He looked at Caleb. He said, Mr. Stone. Caleb held his coffee. Morrison said, Your operation is in excellent condition. Caleb said, Yes. Morrison said, Your wife's documentation is among the most thorough I've reviewed. Caleb said, I know. Morrison said, She identified a compromised administrative relationship and disclosed it appropriately before it could affect your claim. Caleb said, She did. Morrison held his notes. He said, Is there anything else I should know about the claim or the operation? Clara held her coffee. She said, There is a letter on file from a St. Louis attorney documenting the resolution of a matter that Harrington had attempted to use as additional pressure against the claim. The matter is resolved. The documentation is in the file I prepared. Morrison held his notes. He looked at the file. He found the letter. He read it. He held his notes. He said, This is thorough. Yes, she said. He held his notes. He looked at the stamping apparatus he had brought. He stamped the papers. He said, The ranch belongs to you. He left. Clara held the stamped papers. Caleb held his coffee. The kitchen was very quiet. After a moment, Clara put the stamped papers on the table between them. She looked at them. He looked at them. He said, Morrison said the ranch belongs to you. She looked at the papers. She said, He said it belongs to us. He held his coffee. He said, Clara. Yes, he said. He said, You have been working toward this since before you arrived. Since November 1885, she said. When I organized the records. He held his coffee. He said, You organized your father's records in November 1885. Yes, she said. He said, You came here in October 1886. Yes, she said. He said, 11 months of preparation before you arrived. She held her coffee. She said, I didn't know I was preparing for here specifically. I was preparing for somewhere stable enough to do what needed to be done. He held his coffee. He said, And this turned out to be that place. She held her coffee. She said, This turned out to be considerably more than that place. He held his coffee. He held her gaze. He said, Yes, it did. They held their coffee. They held the stamped papers. They held the 6 months that had become the thing they were now. He said, The summer work. Starts next week, she said. I have the schedule. He held his coffee. He said, Of course you do. She held her coffee. She held the ghost of the expression. She went to get the summer schedule. He sat at the table. He thought about October and April and the 11 months before October and the 6 months between October and April. He thought about a woman who had organized her father's records in November 1885 and had carried them in a trunk for 18 months and had waited for the right moment and had found the right moment here. He thought about Victor Harrington, who had been working a strategy for 6 years and who had found that the strategy had been dismantled by someone who had arrived 3 months into that 6 years. He thought about Putnam and the supply chain and the documentary evidence and the telegraph in March and the attorney's response in 11 days. He thought about the December storm and the North Slope and what happened when you went out alone into Montana winter and what happened when you didn't come back and what happened when someone came to find you. He thought about the rule he had built and the monument the rule had produced, and what the monument looked like now and what it looked like before. He thought about 8 years and one rule and the specific December night when he had said something true out loud for the first time in 8 years. He thought about the new rule. He thought the new rule is better. In the years after the inspection, the Stone Ranch became a reference point in Montana territory. Not immediately. Not in the way of things that were famous or dramatic. In the way of things that were real, gradually through accumulated evidence, through the specific pattern of consistent excellence that compounded into reputation. The cattle operation expanded in the first year after the inspection. Clara had identified the market relationships. Caleb had known the land and the herd. Together, they had found a cattle buyer in Helena who paid 20% above the regional average for consistent quality and consistent volume. The consistency was Clara's achievement. She had standardized the supply records in a way that made the quality and volume documentable, which made the premium price defensible for the buyer and reliable for the ranch. The first Helena payment was the largest single payment the ranch had received. Caleb looked at the number. He said, "Clara." She held her coffee. She said, "Yes." He said, "This is." He stopped. She held her coffee. She held the ghost of the expression. She said, "I know." He held the payment. He held her gaze. He said, "You found this buyer." "Yes," she said. He said, "By what method?" She said, "By comparing 3 years of regional cattle prices against buyer reputation records from the Territorial Trade Office and identifying which buyers consistently paid premium rates for documentable quality operations." She held her coffee. Helena came up first by a significant margin. He held the payment. He said, "When did you do this?" She said, "February." He said, "February." "Yes," she said, "while I was also managing the North Slope and the inspection documentation and the Putnam disclosure." He held the payment. He said, "Of course you were." She held her coffee. She said, "The relationship needs to be maintained. I've drafted a quarterly reporting format that keeps the buyer informed of our quality metrics between deliveries." He held the payment. He said, "A quarterly reporting format." "Yes," she said. "It's on the desk." He held the payment. He thought about a woman who had arrived in October with soft hands and a leather case, and who had spent the subsequent months simultaneously defending the ranch against Harrington, managing the operations through a Montana winter, preparing for the most thorough land inspection she had ever seen. And in February, while doing all of that, had identified a Helena cattle buyer who paid 20% above regional average and had drafted a quarterly reporting format to maintain the relationship. He thought I wrote to an agency in January asking for a ranch woman. He thought what I have is incomprehensible relative to what I asked for. He thought I did not know to ask for this because I did not know this existed. He thought that is the most significant thing I have understood in 8 years. The second year brought the expansion. Clara had been planning it since November of the first year, which was when she had finished understanding the full range of what the ranch could be, rather than what it was. She brought the plan to Caleb on a Tuesday evening. She had been building the plan for 6 months. She had the numbers, the market analysis, the operational requirements, the capital requirements, the timeline, the risks, and the mitigation strategies for each risk. He read it. He read it for an hour. He said, "This is the ranch in 3 years. If the expansion goes according to projection," she said, "which it will within a reasonable margin." He held the plan. He said, "This is considerably larger than what we have." "Yes," she said. "The Helena relationship and the water rights give us the foundation for something larger. If we use the foundation." He held the plan. He said, "The water rights. The reason Harrington wanted them," she said, "the same reason makes them valuable to us." He held the plan. He said, "You've been planning this since November." "Since I understood the Helena relationship," she said. "Once the relationship was established and the water rights were secure, the expansion was the logical next step." He held the plan. He held her gaze. He said, "All right." She said, "All right." He said, "Yes, do it." She held his gaze. She said, "You don't want to review it further." He said, "I've been reviewing it for an hour. It's thorough. The numbers are right. The timeline is realistic." He held the plan. "And in 16 months, I have not found an analysis you've done that was incorrect." She held his gaze. She said, "You're trusting me?" He said, "Yes." She held his gaze for a long time. She said, "All right." She went to begin the expansion. The expansion took 2 years and went within the margin she had projected. Victor Harrington watched it happen. He watched it from his own property, which was larger than the Stone Ranch in acreage, but which had not been growing in the way the Stone Ranch had been growing, and which did not have the Helena relationship, and which did not have the water rights. He had not pursued the land office approach after March of the first year. He had sent no more letters. He had found in the specific way that strategic men found when their strategy had failed, that the Stone Ranch had become something he could not approach because it had become too solid to approach. It was Clara's documentation that had made it solid. It was Caleb's operation that had made it real. It was both of them together that had made it both. Harrington understood this. He understood it with the specific understanding of a man who has been outmaneuvered by someone he underestimated, which is the most instructive kind of understanding available. He did not stop watching. He simply watched differently. He watched with the understanding that the Stone Ranch was not going to fail, and was not going to be available, and was not going to be anything other than what it had become, which was the most successful cattle operation in this part of Montana Territory. He watched with something that in the specific private accounting of a man who does not enjoy being wrong was closer to respect than anything else. One evening, late in the summer of the second year, Caleb and Clara sat on the porch of the cabin that had been expanded in the spring after the inspection. The mountains were holding the summer light in the specific way they held it, the way that made everything look both real and more than real. Caleb said, "You know what they said in October?" Clara held her coffee. She held it with both hands in the way she held things that mattered. She said, "They said I would destroy your ranch." He held his coffee. He said, "They were right about one thing." She looked at him. He said, "You did destroy something." She held her coffee. She said, "What?" He held his coffee. He looked at the mountains. He said, "The version of this ranch that was built to need nothing. The version of me that believed needing nothing was the correct strategy for a man who had lost everything." He held his coffee. "The monument to the loss. The rule I built to protect against caring about anything I could lose." He held her gaze. "You destroyed all of that." She held her coffee. She held his gaze. She said, "Was that a bad thing?" He held his coffee. He held her gaze. He said, "You destroyed the version of my life that was smaller than it needed to be." He held her gaze. "And you built something larger instead, in the same space, with the same materials." She held her coffee. She said, "I didn't do it alone." He said, "No, but you started it." She held her coffee. She held his gaze. She said, "Caleb." "Yes," he said. She said, "I came here because I had nowhere else to go." "I know," he said. She said, "And I stayed because I chose to." "I know," he said. She held his coffee. She held his gaze. She said, "I want you to know that the choosing is not finished. I choose this every morning when the coffee is made before 5. I choose it when the accounts need reviewing, and when the North Slope needs managing, and when Harrington sends another representative to the yard." She held his gaze. "I am not here because I ran out of other places to be. I am here because this is what I choose." He held her gaze. He held his coffee. He held all of it, the October train station and the Duke paddock, and the December fever, and the March telegraph, and the April inspection stamp, and all of it. He said, "I choose it too." She held her coffee. She said, "I know." She held the ghost of the expression. She said, The fall cattle movement needs to be coordinated with the Helena schedule. He held his coffee. He said, "The schedule is on the desk." She looked at him. He held his coffee. He said, "I put it there this morning." She held her coffee. She held the ghost of the expression, and it was no longer the ghost of the expression. It was the expression itself. She said, "You made a schedule." He said, "You've been making schedules for 16 months. I thought I would try." She held her coffee. She held his gaze. She said, "Is it good?" He held his coffee. He said, "It's thorough." She held her coffee. She said, "I'll review it this evening." He said, "I know." She held her coffee. She said, "Caleb." He said, "Yes." She said, "Thank you." He held his coffee. He said, "For what?" She said, "For opening the door in October." He held his coffee. He held her gaze. He said, "You came to the door." She said, "You opened it." He held his coffee. He said, "Yes." The mountains held their light. The ranch was quiet. It was the specific quiet of something that had been built right, and knew it not the empty quiet that the ranch had held for 8 years before October, but the full quiet of something that had become what it was supposed to become. The cattle were in. The accounts were current. The Helena relationship was established. The expansion was underway. The water rights were secure. The land was theirs. The town of Millhaven told the story differently now than they had expected to tell it. They told it with the specific correction of people who had been comprehensively wrong, and who understood the wrongness clearly enough to be instructive about it. They told about the woman who had stepped off the train in October with soft hands and a traveling coat and an inventory instead of an apology. They told about the mountain man who had been certain she would not last a month, and who had been wrong about that in every specific way a man could be wrong about a thing. They told about Victor Harrington and what had happened to 6 years of strategy. They told about the Putnam connection and the Helena buyer and the expanded operation and all of it. They told about the December storm. They told that part carefully, because it was the part that explained everything else. A woman who would ride into a Montana December storm after a man who had gone out alone was not a woman who was going to leave when it got hard. She had never been going to leave when it got hard. She had come with a trunk full of her father's records and 6 years of waiting for the right moment and the specific settled determination of someone who had found what she was looking for and was not going to be moved from it. The bride who had arrived in October had not destroyed the stone ranch. She had built it into something it could not have been without her, and the mountain man who had believed for 8 years that he needed nothing had found in the specific October Tuesday of her arrival that he had been wrong about that in the most important possible way. He had needed everything she